Question, I think, next from Chris Lambert, please. Chris Lambert.
Go blue.
If you have chosen to live below sea level in Somerset, is it reasonable to assume you will be flooded?
If you've chosen to live below sea level, is it reasonable to assume you'll be flooded? Kate Smurthwaite.
Well, the simple fact is, when people bought their homes, of course, nobody said, where would you like to live? I'd like to live here. Oh, where's the sea? Just near the sea. Where's the sea? Up there. I think people would have the good sense. The reality is that, yes, there are places that are below sea level, but they have been reclaimed land, and there's been a lot of projects that have been in place to make that land livable over hundreds of years. What we've got now is a situation where some of those defences haven't been maintained, where rivers haven't been dredged, that have been dredged for many, many years, and where protections and barriers haven't been maintained. And what we're seeing is that now the combination of the expected flooding and the impacts of global climate change mean that people are much more at risk than they've ever been. At the same time, we have an Environment Secretary who will not confirm that he even believes in climate change. He's slashed the budget for climate change initiatives by 40%. We spend now 17 million we've got this year for climate change initiatives, which includes working out where it's going to be, doing things to move people, doing things to protect people. It includes carbon capture, it includes all of that stuff. That's about half what we spend on the Queen, and that's what we're spending on what scientists around the world agree is the single greatest danger to the future of the human race, and that is appalling.
Maybe back to Somerset, Mark Littlewood.
Well, is it reasonable to assume that you will be flooded? I think it's reasonable to expect these people to assume that they're taking a risk of that. I mean, I live in a very high crime area in London. I'm aware that I'm running a higher risk than most people, that I'll be mugged or stabbed or whatever. That's part of the risk of the place I choose to live in. That doesn't mean that I don't have sympathy for the people that are afflicted by this, but yes, people who choose to live in areas at risk of flooding presumably know they're taking that risk. I think it's about 1 in 6 homes in the UK are at risk of flooding. The other 5 in 6 are not. The solution here, of course, is frankly not to have Owen Paterson, however decent a man he may be, and the Environment Agency in Whitehall trying to coordinate all of this. What we need to get back to is to actually give the powers to the local communities and the local councils to deal with particular local problems. My local area would have a crime problem, not a flooding problem. Yeah. Somerset would have a flooding problem, less of a crime problem.
There's been a lot of criticism of the Environment Agency, and you used to be their press spokesman, didn't you?
I did.
Do you think they're a good outfit? Do they do a good job? Or do they work their cotton socks off, as Lord Smith says about them?
Well, do they do good? They try their best. I don't think they're set up the right way. I think trying to coordinate how you deal with Somerset and the particular problems of drainage, dredging and whatever from an office in Whitehall is utterly ridiculous. We've actually got to get these powers and responsibilities back to ground level. So it's not a criticism of the personnel at the Environment Agency, is a criticism of the structure. Okay. This shouldn't be organised by a cabinet minister in Whitehall. You've got to put these powers on the ground. These people know how to deal with it better. Allow them to raise the resources and spend the resources on combating these problems at local level.
The woman up there, and I'll come to you over there. Yes.
And obviously there was flooding in Norfolk fairly recently as well, and I grew up in Wales next to the sea. David Cameron actually came there to see the flooding there, and there was an example of local people actually managing that situation. There was local flood wardens who were able to manage the situation and run it, so it was very effective and efficiently ran.
And were there criticisms of the government or the Environment Agency from Wales when it happened?
I'm not sure, but I do know that it was very well run by the local people, and it saved lots of disaster.
Right. And the man at the very back there, and I'll come to you here. Yes.
We, over the last few weeks, have seen lots of local people at all these areas that have been flooded down in the southwest. And they mostly come out with the same historic information that they have always known that when rivers were dredged all the way down to sea level, that this was never a problem, even when we had torrents of rain. When are the so-called experts that are paid a huge sum of money in their salaries going to start taking notice?
Ken Clark.
Well, with great respect, I think it's become a bit of a modern journalistic cliché that every time we have a disaster, and I've no doubt this is a terrible disaster for the people living there, they must be having an absolute nightmare time for the last few weeks, that somebody's got to be blamed. And I don't blame the inhabitants, that's for sure, so whether they're choosing to live there. It's a famous wetland. The background is they've had more rain there than anybody's for 100 years, and it's still raining. And nobody, you know, it's a once-in-a-100-year episode. No one can find in historic times such heavy rainfall in January. And I think when this is all over, of course you need drainage experts, actually, to examine what more can be done to reduce the risk of this once-in-a-100-year episode in perhaps a sensible, expert way. I am not an expert in land drainage. I understand why the locals are clinging to things like saying, oh, you should dredge the rivers more frequently. Whether that would actually make a difference, I think, is highly controversial, though obviously you need to dredge them out occasionally. I mean, this is a real tragedy. It's a consequence of a freak. Well, not freak, it's just the sort of thing that happens every now and again. This is the winter, it is wet, it has rained. It may be made worse by climate change. I don't think it's ridiculous to take the figure, this example, as though we're ignoring climate change. I've noticed a few windmills, I've noticed a few solar panels, I've noticed energy bills going up, and then people in a populist way saying we're going to have a political price on energy when you have an international wholesale market and we're trying to reduce the carbon levels. I do think the present furore about Somerset, who's to blame? Somebody's got to be summoned. It's all like lynch mob stuff is slightly irrelevant to the suffering of the people there, and it should be addressed sensibly and professionally once they can get back order.
Yes, Matthew.
Honestly, I mean, I believe in climate change. How much more evidence do we need? We just had January, was the wettest month in this country ever. Clearly, the pressure's building up. And answering the question, obviously, many people in many parts of the world actually live at sea level or below sea level, but the question is whether it can be managed and whether you're having many more floods and many more problems than you used to, because you buy a house for a long time. And to me, the evidence is building up quite quickly that we are having far more variable weather and far more problems. And so we've got to face up to this and we've got to deal with it. It won't just be Somerset. There'll be all sorts of places in all sorts of ways. And it's about time, and it is actually pretty shocking that you have a climate change denier as responsible for this problem.
Who were you saying was a climate denier in charge?
Well, isn't Owen Paterson extremely sceptical about it?
Prime Minister says he's rather convinced it probably is something to do with climate change.
Oh, is he? Well, that's excellent. That's news to me.
But Ken Clarke, you were agnostic.
No. I quite accept climate change. But the evidence I use is the fact that the little egret is now quite a common bird all over the country, and I used to get quite excited when I saw it in southern France. So we have a policy on climate change. You've got to get that again. It's difficult energy policy. You've got to get the balance right between getting down carbon emissions to the right level whilst keeping it sufficiently affordable to stop pricing all our businesses and so on out of international markets. And we're engaged in that seriously.
We've got a number of hands up.
It's no good turning every rainstorm and every flood into an argument, political argument about climate.
The flooding in Somerset is to do with every rainstorm and every flood. I mean, what has happened is we have had one of the wettest winters for 100 years we have, and you keep breaking all the records. They keep happening again and again in different parts of the country, and the reason for that is because of climate change. Of course it is. It is not global warming. People like the idea of, oh well, global warming, I'll be able to grow a few olives in my back garden. It's not like that. It is unpredictable, major weather changes, and we need to make sure that we're up for it and that we are protected.
The government is doing a good job, do you think, on this?
I think possibly having somebody who's unable to be able to have a cull of badgers in charge of defending us against these major changes in climate is not necessarily the best policy. I know that he was going to have a review, he was going to have a concrete policy, he said, in 6 weeks' time, and then the Prime Minister said last night that he was going to call in the army, and then the army arrive and then they go home again. You know, this is policy making by photo opportunity. It is very unfortunate. We need to make sure we have
the army arrived. Two majors arrived.
OK, two majors arrived and now they've gone home
again. That's the army. We're in real trouble, I tell you.
That's what we heard. I mean, that's the spin we heard last night. The spin we heard last night was that the Prime Minister had called to the army, and then we see it's two majors who've gone home. You know, this is the way in which we seem to be running things. It is not competent. It is not what people say.
But isn't this exactly the problem here? Is exactly what Mr Clarke has just said. I've noticed a few windmills. I've noticed a few solar panels. So have I. What I haven't noticed is what we were promised, which is the greenest government in history. We were told that, and we didn't get it.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I think it's like a conversational phrase. We have an enormous energy bill. We have green levies. We have a big investment in offshore wind and solar going ahead. We have a pattern of subsidies.
All right,
and a lot of fracking as well.
I'm not a climate change denier. We have a serious policy on climate change, which is interrupted by daft promises.
I'm going to interrupt
about
you.
fixing the energy
Thank
price.
you. The woman in yellow. I want to hear from more members of our audience. All right. The woman in yellow there, please.
Yeah, hello. What I'd like to say is our weather isn't going to change. We've got our weather, we've got our rain. What are we going to do to help these people? We have loads and millions of pounds put into foreign aid. What about English aid? Can't we have a big bucket for all of these extra taxes to go to English aid to help these people? Some of these people can't afford insurance because they're on the poverty line. Some of these people haven't got house insurance. Those that have are told that it's an act of God. When are we going to help our own people?
English aid being what? That you would give a large sum of money to people living in Somerset as an area in special need?
It can just be a complete new... All these people are saying about wealth taxes and everything. We need a new bucket for the ordinary people to help and dish in when we haven't got enough money to help ourselves.
All right. And you in the third row. And just one or two other members of the audience before we go on. Yes.
Yeah. With the increase in what's called global warming, wouldn't people see that... I guess that things like this are a much higher possibility now, and shouldn't things have been put in place, such as flood defences, already to stop this from happening?
Yes. And you say in the blue, in the grey-haired man, yes. Well, greyish. Well, it's not what it was when you were born. Exactly.
Listen, when I was 11 years old, doing geography at high school, I learnt that floodplains were for floodwaters. When are we going to stop building houses and factories on floodplains? It just pushes water further down the system.
Okay. And the man in the brown jacket in the centre there, you, sir.
I think it's quite a strange thing to complain that we're not giving enough money in English aid when things like Syria are happening right now. Yeah, the flooding is terrible, but as the question sort of pointed out, you've accepted that risk by choosing to live in a floodplain. If you're Syrian, you haven't accepted to be in a civil war.
All right, we may come to that issue later, but I'm going to move on now.